It could be argued that we are now in the midst of a coup d'etat in slow motion. Democracy is weakening. Corporatism is strengthening. Yet none of us has chosen this route for our society, in spite of which our elites, quite happily, continue down it.
This is a multi-lane highway, a kind of savage laceration that runs directly over the center of Camden, New Jersey, so that commuters in and out of Philadelphia never have to see this city, this sacrifice zone. And that's what we've done. We've rendered those trapped in these sacrifice zones invisible. These people have been not just rendered invisible through infrastructure, but they've been rendered invisible through a media which doesn't report their stories at all. And we should also note that they're completely trapped. They can't get loans. Rents are actually quite high in Camden, although you're living in dilapidated conditions. And this was one of the major manufacturing centers of the United States. You used to have RCA Victor, the famous Italian tenor Caruso used to come here to record. Campbell's Soup, one of the largest companies in the country, was here. This was a major port up until World War II. A lot of battleships were built here. I think just in the port in World War II, 35,000 people were employed. I'm a great admirer of the Canadian intellectual John Ralston Saul, who used the term corporate coup d'etat in his book, The Unconscious Civilization. It was a very important book for me because it gave me the vocabulary to understand that corporate coup d'etat, how it was carried out, and how it expressed itself in our society.
In 1995, writing something like that felt really risky because I was essentially saying, you know, Mussolini won the Second World War. It was his proposal, corporatism, that theoretically was defeated the Second World War, and I was really arguing that was the way of organizing society which had become more and more powerful.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
And I was slightly covering my bets by saying that it was a coup d'etat in slow motion because I was feeling my way into it. Nobody ever said anything like that.
When I sign this bill into law, America will have the lowest marginal tax rates and the most modern tax code among major industrialized nations.
Where I guess I was wrong was that it wasn't in slow motion. It was really very fast. When you think about it, it was really a matter of a couple of decades.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
the office of President of the United States.
And there's no question that the coup d'etat has happened. We're well into that world. We're well into a corporatist world.
But this crisis that we're in, maybe we want to call it a legitimacy crisis, right? The status quo or the legitimating framework of capitalism, right, that has sort of guided us over the past 3 decades. And this kind of organizing system has really lost legitimacy. The main reason is simply that it's been a project that has benefited elites enormously. And despite all of the kind of rhetoric of how much, market flexibility will help workers, how much free trade will help, average people become more skilled and get better jobs, the reality is ordinary working families are not doing well. In fact, they're doing substantially worse than they were doing a few decades ago.
So this kind of rolling coup d'etat has created a system that is, at least in its political veneer, is burlesque in character. And that gave rise to Trump. The elites, they look at Trump as an embarrassment, which he is. I mean, he's idiotic, he's narcissistic, he's incompetent, he's lazy. But Trump at least was astute enough to realize that he had to give the corporate CEOs, Wall Street, what they wanted, which was the tax cut.
Deductions that, in essence, are temporary for the middle class, but are long-term for his wealthy friends in real estate, in private equity, etc.
He gave the military a 10% budget increase, which they didn't even ask for. And he deregulated industries like the EPA. And he stacked the courts with corporate-friendly judges. And so they tolerate him.
For a number of very hardcore economic libertarians, particularly billionaires and individuals like the Koch brothers, they've made very clear since the early 70s that they would like to see a system that rewards property owners, that is a democracy that's set up to represent those with money, those with economic power. And that's the government we have today, because it's been shaped and crafted by billionaires that are hoping to ensure that democracy doesn't exist, that instead we have just a constellation of powerful interest groups.
It was basically saying individuals cannot be the source of legitimacy in society. It has to be done on the basis of self-interest. It has to be done on this basis of specialist groups.
It is better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep. That's a famous Mussolini quote. You retweeted it.
And look, Mussolini was Mussolini. It's okay to, it's a very good quote. It's a very interesting quote. And I know it, I saw it. I saw what, I know who said it, but what difference does it make, whether it's Mussolini or somebody else? It's certainly a very interesting quote.
Do you want to be associated with a fascist?
No, I want to be associated with interesting quotes.
I think this particular time in American history, including Trump, is one of the most important periods of the history, including the revolution. And I say that carefully as a historian, because they've run out of options. And what you see is Donald Trump is the end of the option of a corporate-dominated system. It may go to fascism. It's not at fascism yet, thankfully. The possibility of something approaching fascism, particularly if there is violence, particularly if it's in the black community, something of repression, attack on civil liberties, is certainly possible and could be very ugly. Could be very ugly.
You can see that the CNN logo has been superimposed onto the other fighter's face.
What all these tweets reveal about the thinking of the most powerful man in the world and his priorities, and some would argue his humanity.
By now, it is obvious that Trump is actually a bad negotiator.
This symbiotic relationship between Trump and his so-called adversaries in CNN and MSNBC, it's kind of phony when you get right down to it. I mean, CNN made $1 billion last year. Cable news companies will steadily gain and make money during the course of the election season. And then as soon as the election happens, their profits will drop off. That did not happen with Trump.
He gets 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream with his chocolate cream pie instead of the single scoop for everyone else.
They've continued to make money. They're making bank like never before. And Trump is definitely the reason. Everybody understands this.
Trump is the symptom. He's not the disease. The system was already so corrupt. And the anger towards the elites in both the Democratic and the Republican Party was so pronounced that his vulgarity actually gave voice to a large segment of the American public that was sick of being betrayed and lied to. We know from 2008 that the segment of the population that has suffered the most economically are African American households, because they can put forth a black face or a woman. It functions as a brand, and that's what Obama was. Obama was a brand, and that's why after he won in 2008, Advertising Age gave Obama its top annual award, which was Marketer of the Year.
I love you too.
The corporate state doesn't mind having somebody like a Trump around. It's sort of embarrassing. But they don't really mind providing he brings the taxes down and providing that he gives them contracts and providing that he does what they want. If he gets too annoying, they get rid of him. It isn't clear to what extent he understands that he is a sort of, a dancing puppet or doll.
It's so good to be here again, Sean. You're the greatest ratings when I'm on your show, don't you?
People who spent a lot of time and money getting the Supreme Court to remove controls on spending on elections, putting in place laws that have to do with how corporations will run. Those people are watching carefully to see the extent to which is this boy our boy or not. Can we really get enough use out of him?
The most unreal, surreal election we have ever seen.
Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again.
Get your ball. Get your ball. Mine too. That's our storage one. And that's the one back there. My husband lost his job, and we were scrapping down here. So we lost our house like 9 years ago. We went down here almost 9 years ago. When our house got foreclosed on, we just stayed here because it was close to the scrapyard. And here we are now.
It seems there's no good news when it comes to the housing market. Sales of existing homes plunged 8.6% in November as compared to October.
In just 6 months, 3 of the 5 biggest independent firms on Wall Street have now disappeared.
9 years ago, a lot of families went downhill, broke apart, lost their families, their jobs, their houses. We weren't the only ones. Politicians would come down here and walk in our shoes just for a day, so they can see the life that we live.
These are sacrifice zones, places that capitalism exploited and destroyed for profit, and left behind misery poverty, environmental devastation. What have you seen in terms of patterns, like over, let's say, the last couple years? Has it been stable, or things getting worse? How would you describe?
Well, I know I've been here going on 9 years, and over the past couple of years, we are feeding more families. And I'm talking about the husband, the wife, and the children. 20% might be actually living on the street. The rest of them may be in low-income housing or something like that.
200 people might come in. A month with the children, and they tell us, I'm here because I can't pay my electric bill and feed my kids.
Why? Why do you think that is?
Because I think that in spite of the fact that the economy has improved for a segment of the population, the people that are at the bottom, life really hasn't changed, and it's probably even gotten harder for them.
You see cities that have been sacrificed. Youngstown, Ohio, one of the steel capitals of the world. What these capitalists have done in cities like Camden, in cities like Youngstown, in southern West Virginia, they're doing everywhere. Reconfiguring the global economy into an incredibly wealthy global oligarchic class.
Listen, don't take this the wrong way, but you sound like a left-wing nutbar.
I don't usually go on shows where people descend to character assassination. If you want to discuss issues, that's fine, but I mean, this sounds like Fox News, and I don't go on Fox News. Look, you have had very eloquent writers, people like John Ralston Saul in Canada, who have laid this out with, incredible lucidity. And to somehow attack this critique by calling someone a engages in the kind of trash talk that's polluted the corporate airways.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. We like hearing your thoughts.
It'll be the last time.
Thank you all for being here, this very incredible group of world-class business leaders. That's what you are.
These CEOs are, in some cases, pulling compensation packages in the billions of dollars, often defrauding their own shareholders.
So this is the bill right here, and I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And jobs are produced through companies and corporations, and you see that happening. Corporations are literally going wild over this.
These corporations and banks, what did they do with the tax cuts? Well, they bought back their own stock.
It's $170.8 billion. That's how much in buybacks this year. That is the most we've seen this far into a calendar year ever.
Why? Because if the stock goes up, the compensation packages for the managers of these corporations goes up. It's not good for the economy. It's not even good for their company.
Corporations are literally going wild over this.
There's a business term, harvesting. They're harvesting themselves. That's what Lehman Brothers did.
The 62-year-old Wall Street tycoon raked in nearly $500 million between 2000 and 2007.
And it's this kind of insane attitude where they're just looting and stealing as fast as they can as everything collapses.
This used to be a heck of a steel town at one time, just like losing a good friend.
As far as I remember, Grandpa worked here all his life. Back in the 60s, as I was a kid, he used to tell me that one day this mill would close down and this valley would cry. I said, there's no way. It's too big. It's huge. It goes from miles this way to way miles that way. And I said, it's never going to close. And by golly, his words were true. This used to be the pride of the nation. It's gone. It's gone. Along with this and hundreds of other mills just like it. But this one right here, this was the pride of the nation.
On September 19th, 1977, Sheet and Tube, now a subsidiary of the Likes Corporation, announced that it was closing down most of its Campbell plant. 5,000 steel workers, many of them skilled veterans of 20 to 30 years, lost their jobs.
It's hard to believe this is happening. After working here for so many years, it's hard to believe that we're put out on the street and don't know what we're going to do.
It really started in the late 70s when these companies were able to move their production offshore. So you saw the ending of a number of steel companies, the shifting of manufacturing to the global south, where the wages were lower, where the environmental rules were not either existent or enforced. And that's the beginning of this concept of these transnationals. They had the technology to do it, they had the transportation systems to do it, and frankly, governments weren't stopping them.
And I just remember one day I was working and the boss come up to me and says, that's it, we're going home. I thought, we're going home early, why? He said, because we're closed. And they closed the doors on us there. I don't know what to say. It's a crying shame. It really is. I was a long-time Democrat, but this last election before it came along, I switched parties. I switched parties. I'm Republican now, and I think Mr. Trump is doing a great job for us. I think he's trying. You're going to help the country you work for, and I think he's trying to do that. I really do.
The corporate coup d'etat was begun in the early 1970s. Lewis Powell, in his 1971 memo, which he wrote when he was an attorney for the Chamber of Commerce, he later became a Supreme Court justice, talked about what he called the assault on the free enterprise system. And he called on corporations to use their power, and in particular their money, to build counter institutions and to take over and destroy liberal institutions. Institutions that traditionally gave a voice to the working class and cared about the rights and needs of the citizenry.
Tonight, Ralph Nader charges the Detroit car companies with running risks that can't hurt them, but do hurt us.
Quote, perhaps the single most effective antagonist of American business is Ralph Nader.
And so if they do anything to help New York City, it will be to help the banks.
Who, thanks largely to the media, has become a legend in his own time and an idol of millions of Americans.
Not here to excuse, condone, or justify in any way our investigating Mr. Nader.
I don't want to have a climate in this country where one has to have an ascetic existence and steely determinations in order to speak truthfully and candidly and critically of American industry.
The Powell Memorandum was a combination of illusion and paranoia. He basically said to the business community, you got to hire a lot more lobbyists swarming over Congress. You got to pour a lot more money into their campaigns, both parties, Republican, Democrat. You got to get out on the campuses and get right-wing speakers to combat progressive speakers. He had the whole
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
People like Ronald Reagan, in an early form of modern populism, began switching everything back to, if you like, a pre-Teddy Roosevelt period.
My fellow Americans, in recent days, all of us have been swamped by a sea of economic statistics, some good, some bad, and some just plain confusing. You see that red line? It represents the rate of unemployment from 1968 through the present. The Congress should act on regulatory reform to help make government more economical and efficient, and the private sector more productive.
With tax reform and budget control, our economy will be free to expand to its full potential. That's our economic program for the next 4 years. We're going to turn the bull loose. Thank you all very much. What you've done for me is better than a hot tip.
Equivalent things were starting to happen in Italy, in England. You could already see the cracks opening up so that gaps between rich and poor began growing.
I am trying to tell you there is no program or promise that a president can make that the federal government can come in and wave a wand and do this.
The only voice you heard was this voice of the inevitability of the marketplace.
I hear you, and millions of other men and women like you stand for the values of hard work, thrift, commitment to family, and love of God that made this country so great and will make us great again.
We saw the rise of what I would call the faux liberal class. Clinton spoke in that traditional feel your pain language of liberalism, and yet assiduously carried out an assault against the citizenry on behalf of corporate power.
Today, as I sign the North American Free Trade Agreement into law, we are ready to compete, and we can win.
So it's under Clinton that you get NAFTA.
NAFTA allowed manufacturers, particularly auto manufacturers in Canada and the United States, to move their production to Mexico. It was deliberate. They moved their production, their companies there because they had such low wages in Mexico, which did not help the Mexican workers, by the way. It's just false to say that Mexico won. It was a lose-lose-lose for the people and a win-win-win for the corporations.
Down the hall to the White House East Room he came with 3 of his predecessors in tow. But the real effort by Mr. Clinton today was to say to doubters that he's prepared to fight for the treaty.
This has happened all over the world, but particularly in the United States, the radical decline of the labor movement and unions, which were a political force, even more importantly than they were on the shop floor. The United States always had weak unions to kind of countervail against the corporations. At the peak, there were 34% of the labor force. But they are now down to 11% total and only 6% in the private sector. So essentially the countervailing power base, an institutional power base, is gone. And part of that was an all-out attack by organized corporations who went after them.
Today we are taking an historic chance to make welfare what it was meant to be, a second chance, not a way of life.
It's under Clinton that you get the destruction of welfare, and originally 70% of the recipients of our welfare program were children. It's under Clinton that you get the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill.
Crime has been a hot political issue, used too often to divide us, while the system makes excuses for not punishing criminals and doing the job.
Because the Democrats were taking back the issue of law and order from the Republicans. Laws to incarcerate double, triple sentences, 3 strikes you're outlaws, so that people could go to prison for life for nonviolent crimes. So there was an explosion in the prison industry, which of course is a form of social control for deindustrialized pockets.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
And they used all the coded words, super predators, law and order. As the pillage was being carried out, the white majority was being indoctrinated with this idea that marginal, usually poor, people of color were responsible for the destruction of the country, the assault on their national identity.
Unemployment here in Ohio is up 85% over the last 8 years since George Bush took office. It's the highest that it's been in 16 years. You can't afford 4 more years of the failed economic theories that say we should give more and more to millionaires and billionaires and hope that prosperity trickles down on everybody else.
In response to President Obama's 2008 election, there was a counter-revolution. Billionaires and powerful corporate interests were terrified that Obama and Democrats in Congress would tax the wealthy, that they would redistribute wealth in this country, that they would enact overreaching healthcare reform. And in response to that, the corporate interests and billionaires, they funded hate groups and front groups to oppose the Obama agenda and to whip up hate in society, to divide Americans on race and class and religion.
For centuries, Muslims built mosques where they won military victories. Now they want to build a mosque at ground zero, where Islamic terrorists killed 3,000 Americans. It's like the Japanese building at Pearl Harbor.
They placed advertisements on television scapegoating Muslims, claiming that criminal justice reform will put dangerous criminals on the streets, showing pictures of African Americans and conjuring racial fear.
美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
This was not because billionaires and major corporations necessarily believed in these messages, but they wanted to undermine political support for economic reform.
The Supreme Court today handed down a landmark ruling on campaign finance laws.
In a 5-4 decision, the court overturned century-old restrictions on corporations from using their funds to advocate for a specific candidate. The majority opinion affirms corporations have First Amendment rights and that the government can't limit their political speech.
They have done things like allowed unlimited infusions of corporate cash as the right to petition the government or a form of free speech. It's a complete inversion. So your constitutional rights are still exist on paper, but have been reinterpreted to essentially bolster corporate power. And that has left us utterly defenseless.
I would argue that we're already well engaged in the act of cutting our own arteries, whether it's the throat or the wrists. If we're slipping into such a foolish act, it's largely because we've allowed ourselves to be convinced by our own elites that the democratic system is a secondary product of the free market.
We had a period of time where we had 7.5 miles of mills, okay? Continuous, 7.5 miles of mills. There's none left now, okay? And all our manufacturing left this country, all these things, and I blame it on the politicians. It's the establishment. It's Washington, D.C. They got their little clique. They got their thing. They don't care about anything else. And it doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, they're all the same. They're all, I'm sorry to use that language, but they're all, they're in there for one thing. They're in there to get elected. The reason Donald Trump's in there is because he's a celebrity, or he did this or he did that. He is in there because he is not one of them. And we are so frustrated, we had to vote him in. If Donald Trump goes away, we'll find another Trump. Believe me, we'll find another one.
The people dreamed this country. The people built this country. And it's the people who are making
and the Obamas, although they talked about families and children and justice and so on, maintained these rights for corporations, promoted the right of their companies to do whatever they want around the world. In a strange way, It was those who might oppose Trump right now who set the stage for him to be elected. It was the very policies that hollowed out North America. I mean, we created huge pockets of poverty. We've never had in 100 years the same difference between rich and poor. The class difference is incredible. They set the stage for a savior. Obama was supposed to be that savior, and he wasn't. And what happens after a savior fails you, you look to something very different. They set the table, in my opinion, for Donald Trump's success.
President Trump keeping another campaign promise after the president vowed to, quote, do a big number on the Dodd-Frank Act.
Oh, years of financial sector lobbying have succeeded in persuading the House of Representatives to approve the biggest rollback of banking rules since Dodd-Frank.
The bank lobbyists came to Capitol Hill and pressured lawmakers to weaken their safeguards, to roll back those regulations. Although it was mostly Republicans who voted for this measure, Democrats, who are some of the biggest recipients of bank money, also voted with the Republicans to roll back the signature accomplishment of the Obama administration. Hey, Congressman Streichert? Hey, do you have a second? My name's Lee Fong. I'm a reporter with The Intercept. Congressman Reichert? Hi, my name's Lee Fong. Why is Congress moving to remove some of those Dodd-Frank protections designed to prevent another crisis?
Those protections were actually extended into the community banking sector, which did not have a cascade effect.
I helped write Dodd-Frank, and I've defended it for 9 years. And like a lot of people, I think that there were areas in which Dodd-Frank sat a little heavy on our smaller institutions, which are, in some instances, having difficulty lending, making small loans to small businesses.
I know you have a history in the banking sector. You worked at Goldman Sachs. Do you think that had any influence on your decision to vote this way?
This was not a Wall Street bill. This was a bill about providing relief to smaller and community institutions.
So SunTrust and some of these other regional stadium banks are not necessarily small, right?
No, they're not necessarily small.
We're 10 years out from the financial crisis, but Congress has moved to repeal some of these. I think you voted with the Republicans to repeal that, is that right?
I voted to support the community banks. The bill was entirely about the community banks.
Citigroup, along with some of these community bankers and other bank trade associations, really hit the hill. They had a lot of lobbyists working on this.
I didn't have anyone come in sitting, actually.
Do you think that the banking lobby and their campaign donations had any influence the 2008 fiasco?
No.
The banks had no role in that debate?
No, you didn't ask me that question.
Did they have any influence over the vote?
Not on mine.
Actually, banking lobby have any influence on this vote?
Actually, I'll go just the opposite.
Yes, I did support the community bank bill, and I think when people misrepresent what things are, it makes it really hard.
Oh, one last question. You said the regional banks are doing very well. Thank you. All right.
We confuse how we are made to feel with knowledge.
My new game is Trump, the game.
We teach success. That's what it's all about, success. Trump steaks are by far the best tasting, most flavorful beef you've ever had. Because when America is united, America is totally unstoppable. Although I'll be totally honest with you, even if it's not united, we're unstoppable, so don't worry about it.
And understanding how systems of power work, which you can only grasp by investing yourself in a print-based culture, reading John Ralston Saul, reading Noam Chomsky. But in a post-literate society, and the books are still there, but nobody picks them up anymore.
Hello.
Dear brother, how you doing there, man?
Great to meet you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Really great to meet you. Great honor.
Well,
Great honor.
honor's mine now. The question, which America do you want?
Yeah.
But without the rule of imagination, vision, and courage, shattering the indifference and shattering the callousness. And that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Man, I discern fight back in your text. But how do you conceive of everyday people being actually seized with a fire for better world, an alternative.
Well, I think they are if they can figure out how to do it. If they can feel that they're involved, that it's about them. And I think the great disaster of the last 30 years is that a large part of the liberal elite has basically given in to a large part of the themes of the basically anti-democratic elite. And so they then created a discourse, a top-down discourse, which excluded people, which really made those people who are the guarantors of democracy, the voter, the citizen, made them feel excluded. And once they feel excluded, they start getting mad, and they get madder.
There's a new day coming, though. There's signs of hope, a younger generation concerned about not just ecological crisis, destruction of the planet, concerned about especially Wall Street.
So how do you think it
meant so
happens?
much for us, you know. It's unpredictable, you know. In the end, history's a mystery, just like love and life. You just don't know. None of us have control.
No.
Even the ruling classes think that they're mighty, but they're not almighty. They're going to fall sooner or later. We don't know what form. We just hope that it's not neo-fascist. We hope that it doesn't return to the most barbaric and bestial of aspects of our condition, the human condition, because it's inside of all of us. You know, it's inside the hatred and the gangster-like proclivities inside every human being.
Hey, it's frozen dinners. Frozen dinners, and there's rolls, there's soups, all kinds of stuff. So whoever's hungry, and it's end date, I help everybody here. Food, clothes, whatever. Advice, take what you want, guys. There's soups up there too. That's what I do. Right now, something's telling me I have to be here and help the people here first. When I'm done that, then I'll do me. But I put other people first.
You know, I've always been fascinated by the monarch butterfly, particularly in August. You see them heading south. And of course, they're going to head south across the United States to Mexico, where they'll winter. But it takes about 3 generations to do the round trip. So in fact, no butterfly can be a guide. There is no butterfly who knows how to do this, who knows where to go. They're part of a civilization, they're part of a community, they're part of something which understands without knowing. They're a reminder to me of really how civilizations work. We're all part of something which is deeply, deeply interwoven. And this is the enormous flaw in the corporatist argument, that you could sort of slice everybody up into their interest group and then get somebody who's a kind of, you know, Mussolinian, Trump-like figure who uses emotion to hold it all together. That isn't actually the way society works at all.
So in Vasily Grossman's great novel, Life and Fate, he writes about the evils of both communism and fascism, the evils of ideologies that seek to exterminate whole numbers of opponents and people, whether they're condemned because of class or race. And in the novel, he talks about the power of human kindness, which he witnessed as a war correspondent. He was in Stalingrad and went all the way to Berlin. And he said that the power of that human kindness means that it is not humankind that is impotent in the face of evil, but evil that is impotent in the face of humankind. Because it is never able to crush that small kernel of kindness. And I think that's right.
We will not be silenced! We will not be silenced!
I think that we probably only save the world one person at a time.
Let's fold it down so the logo will show.
That Those small, unheralded acts of compassion are what keep us human, and ultimately are the seeds by which we can rise up again.